Emotional healing of memories, lesson 7. Now, we said in lesson 6, we talked about emotional healing. We talked about what it is and what its purpose is. And we all agree that you cannot go through life unscathed, untouched, without some kind of emotional wounding. And for those people that have suffered earlier in life, especially at the hands of perpetrators, wounds later in life become more painful, causing more wounds than the average person because of the earlier pain. And this pain can be associated to memory of the earlier events. And tonight, we're going to focus specifically on severe emotional pain from trauma and how healing of memories can play a vital role in healing. People that come to you because of painful memories, they need to have someone that knows how to pray for them and understands what they're going through, understands that memories play a vital role. They may be hurting from things that have been said, things that have been done, accusations that may have been made in a relationship, and most need to extend forgiveness. We all can agree on that in order that they might be made free. Some may have memories that are so complex, so severe, and so devastating, unless they're able to receive healing from the events that happen in that memory, they may not be able to function the way Jesus wants them to function. Have we had those kind of people in the prayer room with us? Yes, indeed. People that could not function because their memories were so devastating, and we'll go through the kinds of memories later so you'll understand why. They may not be able to function wholly the way Jesus wants them to, and that is why we're here, and that is where healing of memories comes in. And though you may feel ill-equipped, go, oh, I don't know all this stuff, and overwhelmed, God can guide you through the method supernaturally through the power of the Holy Spirit, because you've prepared yourself and said, God, here I am, use me. He'll be right there to guide you and rescue the broken and the oppressed from the memories that make them feel horrible about themselves. And the purpose is to bring truth and to bring peace into those memories. People, we live in a wasteland of painful memories. We've lost our peace. But as Christians, the Bible says we are to live in peace. In Colossians 3:15 says, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body, you were called to peace. So if we're called to peace, we have the opportunity to live in peace, and God has provided a way. So, as a person being ministered to, when we perceive or understand and receive God's presence and recognize when God speaks to us is when we actually experience that peace. So, let's talk about understanding emotional pain from memories. How do memories affect us? Well, memories can make you feel helpless, anxious, fearful, shameful, hopeless. I was just talking to the sister right before this class started, and I said, I'm writing a book, and there's a little piece I just can't get past. And then you know how the Lord comes and says, have you ever talked to me about these memories? Have you ever invited me into those? I went, no, I guess I haven't. So memories can make you feel helpless, anxious, fearful, shameful, hopeless. And devastating memories can affect your ability to function. And the purpose of all of this is to bring truth to the lies that the enemy brings, because the enemy will lie to you about what you're remembering. You can have low self-esteem, believing I'm not good enough, there's something wrong with me, lies that will make you feel shameful, false guilt, lies that makes you feel out of control, feeling helpless, hopeless, and bringing truth to the lie that I must be in control. I've got to have everything in control. I have to be perfect. I have to have everything done a certain way, or perfection orientation. Bringing truth to the lies that fuel anger and hostility. There are many people, you can probably think just that quickly, that live in hostility and anger. And it's because truth needs to be brought to these areas. And the list just goes on and on. And emotional pain from memories can disrupt life so much that it creeps into the subconscious and it affects sleep. It causes restlessness, it causes dreams, it even causes nightmares. You can bury the pain, but the memories eventually will surface, and many suffer from memories that openly plague them, and many suffer from subconscious memory that they can't do anything about. It's back in the subconscious, and they don't know how to access it, much less deal with it. So we're going to talk a little bit about how memories are tied into emotional pain, and a word you'll hear, experiential knowledge. Memories have the most profound influence or effect on a person, and it can be devastating. And memories are part of our experiential knowledge. Depending upon the severity of the experience, it's going to determine what we believe and how we respond. So according to how bad the experience is, and the memory is going to be dependent upon what we believe and how we respond. Okay? We react in a certain way because we pull that experience out the way we responded to it when the experience happened. In other words, however we responded when it happened is how we're going to pull out now. And even though our memory says one thing, our actions say another thing. And our belief system is not dependent upon what happened. What we believe is not dependent upon what happened, but the interpretation of what happened, the way the memory is viewed. But bringing truth to painful and debilitating false beliefs is the truth that sets a person free. John 8:32 says, when you know the truth will set you free. So truth is important in the healing process, and memory is key in bringing healing. It's a vital, vital part of healing, bringing truth into the memories. Let me give you an example I think that we can all relate to. Dr. Ed Smith used this, and many of you are familiar with Dr. Ed Smith, theophostic, yes. He used it in his teaching in theophostic ministry, and I can relate to this, and you'll know why here in a minute. You're walking in woods, and suddenly, out of the corner of your eye, you see this black crooked thing on the ground close to us. Immediately, our mind says, snake, and our body reacts. We jump. I may scream. Our heart beats faster. Adrenaline pumps into the system. We feel panic and fear, and we want to run, and some would actually just want to take flight. But as we draw closer to the black object, the object is really just a stick, and we give a sigh of relief. Our fear goes away. Our panic subsides. And our heart rate returns to normal. What has happened? Our brain remembered an experience from the past, yes. And when that black object wasn't a stick, but it was a snake. And at that time, we reacted to the snake, and the memory became part of our life experience. It's part of our experiential knowledge. You understand now what experiential knowledge is? Based on what happened. Now, many years later, we react in the same way we did back then because our brain says, I've been here, I've done this before, and our brain pulled that experience out and we react in the same way. And even though the truth was that it was only a crooked black stick, my brain said it was a snake. I may not remember the earlier incident, but the emotional memory was there and caused me to react. That's called experiential knowledge. The emotional memory was there and it causes us to react. Let me tell you a little situation when I was a kid. I lived with my brother when I was 12 years old, 13-ish. And we bought a farmhouse in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And it had a wet basement. Does everybody know what a wet basement is? It's a large basement. It's wet. It's made of the ground. And it's done that way purposely so you could hang meat in it and put vegetables like potatoes and onions in. So it was a wet basement. It wasn't really wet. It was just damp, cold in the winter, depending upon how far north you are. And so we had this wet basement. Little did we know we had snakes living in that basement. We never went down there. How would you know? Well, I was coming home from school one day, and I walked from the front door through the living room, and as I caught my eye, I saw a snake, baby snake, about this long, I guess it was a baby, coming across the mantle out of one hole and going into another hole and disappeared. Oh yeah, let me tell you. Well, I don't know what my memories are from childhood, but it triggered them. So I went running into the kitchen and said to my sister-in-law, Lynn, there's a snake on the mantle. She says, are you lying? I thought, why would I lie about something like that? You know, that is not something you'd suddenly want to lie about. I went, no. And she came in there and it was gone, of course. Well, we had to tell my brother. And because the neighborhood had a lot of ranchers and farmers in it, they said, oh, not a problem. You smoke them out. So they literally had to go down in the basement and smoke them out. Well, what does that do? That sends them into the yard. And we had next door a big field, acres and acres and acres, big field. I thought, oh, they'll just go into the yard, into the field over there. Well, that's not what happened. So we were out one afternoon, must not have been very much later, like maybe a few days, I don't remember, and we were out, and my sister-in-law was cutting the grass, she was pushing the mower, and my little nephew was toddling around, was maybe a year and a half old, you know, a little tiny thing, and I saw him go and squat down to pick something up. Something triggered, I think it was the Holy Spirit. Something triggered, and I went to look, and I saw it was a snake, and I grabbed this kid and literally threw him, didn't hurt him, literally threw him, and saw that. My sister-in-law freaks out, didn't know why I was throwing this child, and she was probably as close as I am to you, and I pushed her aside, grabbed the mower, and mowed over the top of the snake. Now, that's reaction, right? Yeah. Remembering something from the past, triggering right now. So, that was my memory, and it came in when that little child was over there getting ready to be maybe hurt. I mean, I don't know what kind of snake it may not have been a bad snake. Who cares? It's a snake. But memory is key in bringing healing. And by the way, we live in a place called Brander Mill that has hundreds of miles of path through the woods. And when I'm walking that path, keeping my eye out, because we've seen snakes and, you know, I can't breathe when I get around them. And there's one day that we were walking and there's this lovely little bridge. I may have told you about that. It goes over the water and I go and look over to see what I see. Well, I was walking over there. Bill says, I probably don't think you should walk over there. Well, laying out was this big, long, ugly, nasty snake. Well, that's my memories I'm telling you about. I hate snakes. It triggers something. Memory is key in bringing healing. However, the brain has an entirely different response when an experience is so intensely traumatic that it reaches an intolerable level. If memories do come, memories may come unbidden and unwelcome, and we flash back to the original event. Did I flash back? No. So it's hidden somewhere. When it flashes back to the original event, it usually involves very intense feelings, especially fear, terror, shame, shock, helplessness. That is where we ask Jesus for peace, because when you've got that person in front of you and they're in such intense trauma, Jesus has to come in.
So when we begin to talk about healing of memories, there are different terms that are used. We can use inner healing, we can call it emotional healing, or healing of memories. And what we are talking about is an area of our soul. Now, we're not talking about the physical body. We are referring to the soul within a person. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 23 shows us, or talks about, we are spirit, soul, and body. That is, that we are tripartite. Now, there are some Christian teachers that disagree and say we're only two parts, but the Bible does seem to indicate, not only here in 1 Thessalonians, but elsewhere, that there is a distinction made between the soul and the spirit. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in lesson number 10 when we talk about soul power. But the normal teaching that's in the charismatic church or the Pentecostal church is that the soul of a person is their mind, their will, and their emotions. And what I would like to do is I'd like to expand that a little bit, especially when we talk about the mind, and also introduce the concept of experiences and memories. And let me explain why. If I understand how our mind works, when we live our daily life and we go through all the things that we ordinarily do, there are many experiences. There are a lot of things that come in through the eye gate and the ear gate, and we feel and we experience and all of this. In fact, there are some scientists that estimate or believe that each day we take in an average of 34 gigabytes of information. And if any of you know anything about computers and hard drive spaces and stuff, 34 gigabytes every day, 7 days a week, that's a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. And somehow that stuff comes in and it all gets processed. And it all gets stored somewhere in different places depending on the type of memory that it really is. And so our mind takes in all of this, it stores it in our brain, and when we begin to recall something, we talk about a memory of an event. If we have an experience, it could be a physical experience, it could be an emotional experience. But what happens is that our mind stores it, and we remember it. And as we walk then through emotional healing with another person, we will walk through some of the life experiences and memories as that person then stands before you. As we said before, and we're going to keep saying it over and over, memories are important because memories are part of our history. They're part of our testimony. And what we don't want is for someone to block them, to suppress them, or to actually deny them. Because what we want to do is invite Jesus into it, and he will then bring the healing that is needed. Now, one of the things that what we are not talking about is we are not talking about guided imagery. That is where you would say, okay, Jesus, come into this memory, and now you go over there, and you go over here, and we would guide Jesus through all the things that were happening. That's not what we're talking about. This is not guided imagery. Because when Jesus comes in, he knows exactly where to go. He knows exactly what to do, and we get to be a part of it. And if we'll learn to say nothing, he will do the hard work for us, and the person is set free. Now, what I'd like to do is, and this is going to be a little bit, it's in your manual, is talk about the 8 different types of memory so that you'll have some understanding on how your brain works. Now, it's going to be a lot of information. It's there in your books, and you can go back and review it. Does this mean that I've got to know all 8? No, because if you go into some of the books that other clinicians write, you'll see that they use different terms, and they may combine things. And so we're going to give you 8, but if you tried to look in other places, you may find that they have different names for it. But this is just one way to kind of look at it. Hopefully the classifications that we give you will help you, though, as someone stands before you. Now, the first one I want to talk about is called narrative memory. That is everyday normal memory. Narrative memory is what corresponds to what people generally refer to as a normal everyday memory, in that they are able to remember, they can put it into language, and it's been made a part of their total experience. Normal everyday narrative memory explains also why we remember some things more than others. And it depends upon the intensity and also the importance. For instance, you could have a meeting with your boss and they're talking about your salary raise for this next year. A month from now, 6 months from now, maybe even a year from now, you can go back and you can recall what was said and even all the things that happened in that room. But if I were to ask you tonight, what did you have for dinner 4 weeks ago? I don't think you'd probably remember exactly what it was, because the importance wasn't quite the same. And yet, if I were able to, we could go back and you would say, oh yes, I had whatever it was that night. But normal memory is something that we can visually see, we can hear, we can feel, but as I say, it's going to be different depending on the intensity of the emotions involved and also the importance of it. So that's normal everyday memory. Now the second one is going to be called early memory. And by early memory, what I mean here is this. Medical science has basically shown to us that the brain has in it the hippocampus. And what that means is that it develops over time after a child is born. And they usually say that the hippocampus is fully developed between the ages of 3 and 4. So that they say it's physically impossible for a child to remember something before that time because the hippocampus isn't properly developed. And yet I know, because of the work that we've done with people in prayer rooms or at an altar, that they remember things before that age. And so that's what we call early memory. And what that means is what is being used to remember. And I'm going to give you a possibility, and that is that the spirit of a person has a form of memory where they can remember things which is totally independent of the brain, which is not a part of the soul, it's not a part of the mind. I remember Carolyn telling me once about eggs.
I disagree with this teaching from these doctors because they say you can't really remember anything before you're 3 or 4 because your brain's not developed. I remember being so small that I was in a high chair. My mother was still alive, and I have very few memories of her. Being in that high chair, I can tell you the way it looks. My dad built it. It was painted brown. It was kind of shiny, and some of the paint was chipping off of it. And the thing I remember is being forced to eat eggs. I did not like eggs. I still am not crazy about eggs, but having to eat eggs. Why I even remember is because I was so anemic that made me eat eggs. I can also remember them taking and putting eggs and vanilla flavoring and sugar or something in a bottle and shaking it, breaking it up, and making me, like one of those things that they give you for protein, making me drink it because I was so anemic. How was it that it happened? Who knows? But I was so small, I was in a high chair. So, how does that happen? Is it the spirit of a person, or did I just have this hippocampus that was really intelligent and really built back in those days? But I remember because it was eggs.
Now, John and Paula Sanford have said this, that there have been reported cases of babies born to mothers that have struggled significantly during the pregnancy. And the attitudes of the moms and toward the unborn child have affected the emotional well-being of the child. We've worked with some women that have remembered being in their mother's womb. And they've remembered their mother trying to abort them. They've remembered suddenly the parents found out that it was a boy and they wanted a girl, or it was a girl and they wanted a boy. And when we've had these people go back and talk with their mothers about what they remembered, we found it was absolutely true. So again, science may say one thing, but in actuality, you may find that you're going to be dealing with someone that is dealing with something that is in this early memory type of thing. So that's early memory. Another type is called a sensual memory, and it's tied to the senses. Sensual memory, of course, means that smell, touch, taste, sound, all of this plays into the memory. As I said to you before, most people will see pictures. We will kind of visualize what had happened. We can see the room. We can see who was there. We remember then things that happened. They see the event again in their mind, and they can even hear the words that were spoken. Some people may even smell what they smelled at the time it happened. Carolyn has another story about fried chicken.
I was a little girl, and my mother had already died, and when we got to go to my grandmother's house, she always cooked chicken. Of course, that was the poor man's meal. To me, now, KFC, you have to be rich to afford it. But I can remember the smell of my grandmother's chicken. And you can go to all of these restaurants, and you don't smell it, but you go into someone's home with the same conditions, and it triggers that memory, and it's a good memory of my grandmother's chicken.
Now, Carolyn has good memories. When I was living here in the Martin County area, one of my daughters hit her forehead on the stairs coming up out of the pool. It was the metal stairs, and she sliced her forehead open across the front. I had to race her over to Martin Memorial, where they were going to have to put stitches in because of the wound. And so I walked in there, and they took us back into one of the little areas where they were going to do this. And all of a sudden, just like that, I smelled something that it was ether. And as a child, I had my tonsils and adenoids out, and I remember that they put me under using ether. And I remember all of it came back, the struggle and the crying and all of this. I about hit the floor myself, and they were going to have to work on me. But it's like that was a sensual memory that suddenly I hadn't thought about that for years. And all of a sudden there it was. Okay, so that was number 3. Let's go on to number 4, a physical memory. Now, physical memory is where the body remembers what has happened. For instance, a person who has been sexually abused as a child. Because the abuser may have held them down with an arm and pushed on their chest. They may have pinned both of their hands down. And what happens is that the memory is so traumatizing, most of the time people just repress it. They try and stuff it. And suddenly now, as an adult, something triggers that physical memory. And the person's maybe there and they say, I just don't understand what's going on. I feel this tremendous pressure on my chest. I can't breathe. I know I'm about ready to suffocate, and I don't know why. Well, it could be that their body is reacting to something in the present that is accessing this physical memory from the past. So that's a physical memory. Number 5 is an emotional memory or a feeling memory. And it's tied to an incident that really may not be physically associated to anything. An emotional memory is one where the emotional intensity is attached to the incident, as with intense trauma. And we're talking about when we are with a person who is hurt and when they are traumatized by some event in their life. Now, it's important to understand that our brain will store both emotions and feelings experienced at the time of the event. We can have an emotional experience of the trauma. Our mind stores it. It is remembered, and the feelings at that time are also remembered. And what can happen is that suddenly now things begin to bubble up. There can be fear or panic. There can be anger. There can be a lack of comfort. There can be this emotional pain or hurt. There can be shame or helplessness or even guilt. For instance, here we have the story of a young boy, and he's out playing with his friends. And suddenly somebody comes and they bully his friends. Now, in this young boy's experience, he suddenly is fearful. What if they come over and do that to me? But there's also anger because his friend is being picked on. And so what we find is that it's not something physical in that young man's life, but it's something emotional that is now causing a part of it. And these emotions become a part of then this emotional memory. Number six. Number six is body memory. Now, it's going to be similar to physical memory, yet it's going to be different. The body remembers whether or not the mind chooses to remember. And the body can, but does not have to be tied to some traumatic memory. The body will remember things that have gone on. In fact, what you'll find with many rape counselors or others, if a person can relate a body memory, then they know that something has happened, even though there's no access to any of the memories. The body memory itself validates that something went on, because virtually every cell in our body carries the capacity for memory. Some of them are saying it's somehow tied into our DNA. I don't know all of the different things, but they believe that each cell has the ability to remember things. And it will remember even though the brain says, I don't want to go there. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to push this stuff all the way in the back, and I'm not going to remember it. And this is where we come at times and have the Lord remove the cell memory. As I said before, body memory is infallible. Body memory is also nonverbal, and it's tied specifically to the physical body. Because the body memory will reveal any physical sensations or touch or pressure or pain, physical pain, and that corresponds to, and it usually corresponds to the exact places that it was felt during the original trauma. Body memory involves any unnatural, unexplainable physical responses that occur in a body when a reminder of trauma is encountered.
Let me give you an example. When the body recalls an event, but the memory doesn't, or the brain doesn't, the reaction may be a physical jolt or contraction, or that sinking feeling in the stomach, sudden anxiety or panic. We've seen a person just all of a sudden be anxious and not be able to breathe, or an unnatural expression of fright when something is seen, heard, read even, or recalled. An example is a baby that accidentally has the cord wrapped around their neck before they're born. We have found, and statistics show, that they have a higher rate of psychosomatic symptoms. And it usually relates to the throat, such as swallowing or having difficulties or speech impediments. I'd be very interested to do an experiment on the people that cannot get into an elevator. Suddenly they can't breathe. And all of a sudden they say, no, I just feel like I got something wrapped around my neck when I get into an elevator. I know people that have true problems flying or getting into an elevator. They say, I can't breathe because it relates to the throat. There's a quote by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk that says, our brain may forget, but our body keeps score. And it's been proven to be true, and we've seen it over and over again in the prayer room. Body memories are unexplained stomach aches, headaches, PMS-like symptoms, pain in the arms, pain in the genitals and the colon or the breast areas, frigidity and tensing during sexual intercourse and not knowing why, and flinching from physical touch. Physical symptoms, sometimes doctors cannot explain why their body is having physical symptoms because there's no origination for it. But something has caused it. Another example is a woman being raped. If there's been a prior trauma in her life prior to this rape, that she shoved out the memories, then the subsequent rape may not be remembered either. Or it may. One or the two, or none. But when she gets into a traumatic situation like being held down, the body memory could trigger the memory of the rape. The first or the second or both, because it's body memory. So it may have been shoved away and suddenly the body makes something be recalled that has happened that's been shoved away. Okay, let's talk about some more sensitive things concerning traumatic memories and understanding how the mind works. There is implicit memory, and this means, this is number 7, implicit memory, that there is no cognitive memory. Implicit memory is referred into the ongoing effects of an event, even when no cognitive memory is there, or what caused it. What caused the memories? Yet there's a reaction. No cognitive memory. In other words, people can react and they have no explanation as to why. There's a saying. It says, a person that has implicit memory or no cognitive memory is like a dog, an abused dog. You can tell an abused dog from a well cared for dog by the way it reacts. And people are the same. People that have been physically abused, if not healed, they'll react to certain situations and they can't explain why. Like someone raising a hand to them and they just flinch or they pull back and they don't know why. They can't remember. That's like an abused dog. You can tell an abused dog because if they've been abused, you go to touch them and they just draw back or they snap at you. It's the same thing. Traumatized people who don't remember the event can live out the effects of the abuse in many non-verbal ways. Like, for instance, DID, dissociative identity disorder. We're not going to go into what that is. It's basically a person that has been split because of trauma. But they react and they don't even know why. In most cases, however, the individual has no idea why he reacts in the way he does, why some of the physical symptoms in his body or his systems are malfunctioning, or why he struggles with insomnia or nightmares. In cases in which traumatic memories are being retrieved, implicit memory can often play an important role in validating them. And that's what this is all about, is validating the person in front of you. Number 8, let's talk about one more kind of memory, and that's traumatic memory. And traumatic memory is triggered and stored as real as if it's happening right now. That's traumatic memory. It's triggered and it's stored, and now it's as real as if it's happening right now. They are memories that are outside of ordinary human experience. And what this one teacher that we got this information from, this one psychologist, says, they can only be recalled, this is traumatic memory, they can only be recalled if the person happens to encounter a situation that in some way reminds them of the ongoing terrifying event. That person potentially will see, smell, taste, feel what occurred in the trauma just as if it's happening right now. For instance, is abreaction. If you've studied information with theophostic. Abreaction is when you're suddenly experiencing right now. You're going through the event right now, just like it did then, and going through the steps. And unfortunately, many times when that happens, it re-traumatizes the person. Let's look at an example. This is an example of traumatic memory. A traumatic car accident, and the person has amnesia because they've seen a person die or burn in the car. And all of a sudden, they've got amnesia. They have completely blocked it out. And then another situation happens where they smell smoke or gas, or they see fire, or maybe hear screaming. And suddenly, it triggers the subconscious and the memory of that amnesia event. Sometimes you'll hear doctors say if they have amnesia, probably if something triggers it, suddenly their memory will come back. And it's true. It happens. The memory is so traumatic, it's just stored and put away. It cannot be remembered. And then they go through something that happens, it triggers it, that they see, smell, or they experience it, and it brings the amnesia back. Or the amnesia is basically broken down and they experience it. Now, the accuracy of traumatic memory, and this is how psychologists know if it's true or not, it applies once it's been triggered into the consciousness, and the memory of recall is stored as narrative memory. Now, Bill's going to go into just a minute what that means. The true traumatic memories can only be recalled when there is a sensory replay, or they re-experience it. And it's done by vivid touch, smell, taste, sound, whatever. And then it's trusted as true memory. You'll see on television some of these crime programs, and they go, oh, I remember this, or I don't remember that. And they get the psychiatrist or the psychologist that are professionals to listen to the testimony, because they know with all these different kinds of memory what's true and what isn't. Another validating indicator is the simultaneous experience of some form of body memory as the event is recalled. The memory is recalled, the body remembers, and then the traumatic memory is affirmed.
So that's 8 different types of memory, and you're going to have a quiz on that next time. No, not really. What we want to do is make you understand this. Memory is important to the person who stands before you. There can be all different ways that people have experienced something. But I believe, because of the training that is going on, that you are going to be seeing more and more traumatized people because they've not had a safe place to go. And guess what? You're going to be the people who are safe to be able to help them walk through the things that they have experienced. Because the severely traumatized person is in terrible emotional pain. And again, memory is the key in bringing healing to them. But however, when it's so intense, so overwhelming, so out of the ordinary, the brain has a different way of responding, and when it gets to that place of being intolerable. Because what happens is that the memories, normal memory is processed in the prefrontal cortex. You and I take in all this, you're taking in this now, you're hearing me speak, you're seeing me, and it's being processed right across the front here. And then it gets stored in however God stores it. But when you have an intolerable traumatic experience, it doesn't go here because it's so intolerable. There's a little thing called the amygdala, and all of a sudden that shoots this thing to the back of the brain. And suddenly now in the back of the brain, it's just stored. It's stored as raw data. It's stored as raw emotions. It's stored as raw feelings. and it's not processed across the front. And so a person says, oh, I just don't remember. And that's true, because they've never processed it. But the brain back here has it.
It's holding it.
And it holds it. And so suddenly you find, about the age of 40 or so, things begin to leak. They leak from the back to the front. And suddenly we have nightmares, we have flashbacks, we have dreams, we have all sorts of things that suddenly say, hey, something's going on. I don't understand what's going on, but something happened and I don't know what it was. And a person can become confused, they don't remember, they're frustrated, and guess what? They stand before you saying, can you help me? Because as I say, traumatic memory is stored as raw memory, but it's as fresh and vivid as the day it happened.
Can we just stop here just for a second?
Sure.
It's only been, I think, in the last 20 years that psychiatrists or psychologists or whoever comes up with this stuff has come up with this. They have found that women that has had suppressed stuff somehow right around 40 starts, as Bill says, it starts to leak out and it starts to kind of creep in. And doctors go, why now at 40? Well, they're starting to understand more about the brain and the chemicals of the brain. What happens right around 40? Pardon? Menopause. And what happens? Different chemicals in the brain start moving around and changing. And suddenly all these chemicals are working that didn't before, and stuff starts coming out. Let me just tell you really quickly, at age 40, 39, 40, within a few months, I had a traumatic brain injury. Guess what starts leaking out? Memories of my past that had been shoved away. And the doctors told me, we think something got scrambled in your brain, and those chemicals, and those chemicals started working, and all these things started coming out. Well, that's the reason they're believing that now, is because there's been enough psychiatrists and psychologists and all those specialists that have started studying the brain.
Because normal memory, for it to be quote-unquote normal, it must be able to process language or speech. Mm-hmm. Now, in traumatic memory, because it bypasses the front, it goes into what's called the limbic system, and the limbic system only processes emotions and sensations. And so what you're seeing is that because of the stuff that has happened, when the memories start coming back, they come back unwelcomed. They come back, flashbacks all of a sudden, and it becomes very confusing. And this is where we begin to look to Jesus, to ask him to do what only he can do, because he was there when it happened, and he's the only one that can bring peace. Now, as I said, I know there's a lot of information in your addendum A. There is a little page there that talks about healing of memories condensed, and it will help break down some of the things, at least give you a little definition of some of the things that we talked about here. Again, if you go into any other medical books or psychology books, they may have a little different nomenclature, but it still refers to a lot of the same areas. So let's look at some of the validating features of true memories. Because memories are healed by identifying and bringing truth to the false beliefs. Because in the midst of a traumatic event, we can believe lies about something that is happening to us because of our perceptions. And that is really critical. As a child, I perceive things through a child's eyes. I see it as a child, and I don't understand all of the other factors that are involved in that. But I'm going to give you an if-then statement. If God is called upon to speak healing into the beliefs that a person has, because of a memory that they have, then he is going to do it in an indisputable way.
That's right.
So when we ask him to come, he is going to do something that will validate the reality of the memory that the person is struggling with. We had one person in the counseling that was taking a Christian counseling course. And she related to us how she continually questioned her memories because suddenly she began to think about things as being violated as a child. And there was all this internal turmoil that was going on because things had happened and she had pushed them down, she had pushed them back, she repressed them, she suppressed them, and suddenly now things were, as I said, were bubbling up, and she was questioning her sanity. Is this real? Now, in the class, there was the instructor, and one day the instructor just kind of walked up to her, didn't know what was going on in her life or what she was grappling with, and basically prophesied over her and said this, that Jesus wanted her to know that he was sorry that something bad had happened to her and that she wasn't imagining something that wasn't true.
How about that?
That validated her, and that suddenly it was like, wow, I'm really not crazy. The purpose of memory recall is very important in the validation of an event. When a memory of an abuse is validated, what it does, it takes the pressure off the person because, as I said, when you sit and listen to them, I'm not sure if this has happened, but I know this and I sense this and I feel this and I've had these dreams and I've seen these pictures and I'm just crazy. But remember, the cells of the body and the five senses can only play back what physically happened to them, but God can step into the midst of it and he can validate what has happened so that the brain may have rejected it, but the body remembers, and Jesus comes in and he says, no, this is what's happened. Isn't God good?
Let me give you an example. PTSD in soldiers. They are coming back with so much pain. The government doesn't know what to do about them. There's a statistic, and this is just from a couple years ago, that there were over 500,000 soldiers that have come back since 9/11 and the war started with PTSD. Suffering. Over 500,000. That was just a couple years ago. So the military comes up and thinks, we need to do something about these people. We need to block these memories. They can't function.
We have a better idea.
Yeah, we really do. And we've got a lot more success than what they do. So they've created a drug that blocks conscious memory of trauma to prevent it. Remember, he was talking about storage of memory? To prevent it from being stored. Prevent it. Remember the raw? They want to prevent it from being stored. Well, what does it do then? It keeps it in raw form, right? But unconscious memories will release somehow, and it's hugely not safe, and it's not healthy.
Let me just jump in here. What this drug does is it doesn't allow what's in the back to come around to the front to be processed.
Right.
And if it can't be processed, then you're not going to remember because this is emotions and sensations. This is language and all the other things that we know about. So all this does is it keeps everything back here and doesn't allow it up to the front to actually bring healing into the person's life.
So what happens, it starts to leak out and it becomes unhealthy and unsafe. And it usually makes the people sick. And it's a natural mechanism. Memory is a warning system to alert us of danger when activated. It's also for validation in our history. We have a couple of Vietnam vets that we've worked with. They both were in Vietnam War. And one in particular is in a wheelchair, and I haven't seen him recently. I'm really kind of worried about him. He's in a wheelchair, and he is in physical pain. His body is just wreaking havoc. And his memories are so bad. We've tried to work with him, but he's got PTSD. He's got it shoved down, shoved down, shoved down. And we haven't gotten very far with him because he does not want them to surface. And we have another one that he also was a Vietnam vet, but he was also a New York firefighter. And he was there during 9/11. He was there when the second building fell and killed all of his comrades, over 350 of his friends that he worked with in the fire department. The thing is they go to their counselors, and the counselors just, I imagine it this way, let's rip open a wound here. Let's just a big old open wound, and they open it up and they say, let's talk about what you're feeling. Let's talk about your pain. And all it does is it puts them in the pain and traumatizes them. And they send them home and say, okay, here's some drugs so you can sleep. And what happens? It leaks out and they have the nightmares and the trauma and they can't sleep and they just wake up in a sweat. They are not remembering, and when they do, they cannot deal with it because it's just open and bleeding. What we want to do is ask Jesus to remove the guilt because they've come home believing they're guilty because their friends died and they didn't, or the firefighters died and they survived. We want to ask Jesus to remove the guilt, the shame, the horror, the pain out of the memory, but not remove the memory. Why? It's important. Healing takes place in many facets, but mostly in emotional healing through the memory. John Sanford, which we're all familiar with, said, we all have things that we'd like to forget, but some of us have things we cannot bear to remember. Jesus does not want to take our memories away, because if we lose our memories, we've lost half our wisdom. What's the first thing you see a veteran do when they go into a restaurant? They sit where they can watch the door. True? They've learned how to be safe, how to be vigilant. Now, we don't want to take away the memory, and the reason for this is because our memories are part of our experience, and this is what God uses to work through. And also, it's for our testimony. Emotional pain does leave an imprint on our memory. But our memories can be our safeguard, and it teaches us how to be safe. And when it's needed, Jesus can come in and can take away the shock, the horror, the fear, the terror out of the memory. Take all of that stuff out, and they can still retain the memory. And Jesus chooses not to take away the memory. And as said, when we lose our memory, we lose the wisdom that comes from the experience, and it's our warning system. And memories also become part of our testimony, looking back at what God has done. Can you imagine if we had 500,000 vets that got healing and could see what God did for them? They would change this nation. So rather than block or suppress or deny the memory, we invite Jesus into the memory. And we want to receive healing of painful or traumatic memories because it will be part of our testimony. It will be part of who we are. It will be part of our ministry. It will be part of our authority, and it will be part of our victory. So, how do you know where to go or what to do when a person comes to you needing healing of their memories? They go, I'm in all this pain and I don't know why. And you're going to go, wow, you need some healing of memories of something that's back there. Well, first, we mentioned in our prior lesson 6 about emotional healing that there are 8 major categories that hold people back from healing, from being stuck. And we also talked about recognizing lies. And even in dealing with pain from memories, there are lies that have been received, and it keeps them from victory. So what we do is we invite Jesus into the memory, let Jesus walk through them, and you'll get to hear what Bill and I got to do whenever I went through the healing myself. But Jesus will walk into the event, and he will take away the lies, and he dispels the lies, and you can live in victory.
Now, as I said, we've said this over again and over again. The purpose in praying through the pain of memories is to invite Jesus in. Because, as we said, when Jesus speaks the truth, he dispels the lies which the person has about themselves. But more than that is that suddenly now, when the lies are dispelled, they're able to receive a revelation of the Father's love. And supernaturally, through the power of the Holy Spirit, the lies are uncovered, the truth is received, and this is not something which is head knowledge. This is not academic. This is experiential. They are experiencing the love of God. And when people receive God's love into their life, suddenly now the love of the Father will cover over a multitude of sins. And the victim is able to, depending upon the trauma, over time, to be able to forgive those who have, wrongfully hurt them. And what begins to happen is when the memory has peace in it and they can look back upon it, the things that they were holding in their heart and being wounded by, the emotional pain, suddenly it's no longer important. It's there, it happened, but I'm going on. And they'll be able to forgive others who wounded them. There was a wise pastor once that said to us, when we make a decision to forgive, even though we aren't capable at that moment to fully forgive, the Holy Spirit will take our free will decision and he will supernaturally enforce it. And so when you have a person that stands before you and they say, yes, I want to forgive, but there's just, I'm just not all there, you can say to them, let's forgive, and God will use this to bring healings, and the Holy Spirit will supernaturally enforce it so that the healing process can go on. If emotional healing is what a person needs, the healing of memories are very important to remove the pain and the trauma. And when they've received God's love into their life, then he will set the person free. Because he tells them, we've seen this over and over again, you're not dirty. You're not shameful, especially when we've had sexual abuse and things there. He can come in and say, you're forgiven, you're wanted. He can say to a soldier, you aren't guilty because you came home. That was part of my plan. It's amazing the things that Jesus will say to people when he just is able to speak to them. So on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night or a healing service, you're not going to have time at times to go into all of these different types of memory and have these discussions. But what it will do, it will sensitize you so that if you see that they're going to need more, you can say to them, you need to make an appointment with the inner healing group, with a counselor or whomever who can walk you through and help you understand all that's going on. Now, we've had some situations where we've asked Jesus to help, and it was at an altar. And we found that Jesus came into the person's life. They removed the lies, they removed the unforgiveness, and the emotional pain that was there, and it was all within 10 minutes. And I was blown away because normally this is a half hour, or even more. So it can happen at an altar. But after you've spent some time, you're going to know whether it's something that can be done right now or whether it's something that needs to be then done at a later time. Because there are going to be times when we're going to find obstacles. And just as we discussed in lesson 6, if a person is stuck, sometimes there's an obstacle there that prevents them from receiving their healing from God. And this is a good time that you can begin then, as you stand, to say, God, what do you want me to know that I'm not understanding? Or, God, what is trying to obstruct the truth or distract the person from the truth, or even being able to hear from you? Let me just make a little rabbit trail here. We have found some people can't hear God because growing up, they said to their earthly father, I'm not going to listen to you. You can't tell me anything that I need to hear. And when they confessed that and repented of that, then they could hear God the Father. It was just that easy.
And you'll understand that when you go to the next lesson.
I just throw that out to you as for free. So when a person is experiencing the memories, though, when they're actually in the memories, then we can begin to say, God, where are you in the painful memory? Or what keeps the person from seeing or hearing you, God, in this painful memory? And then the question becomes, okay, suddenly God begins to talk to him. Well, how do I know that it's God speaking to him? Well, remember, we always judge it. God's compassionate. He never judges. He never critically. He never accuses. He never condemns. The word that is spoken to them, the Rhema word for right now, has got to line up with the written word, the Logos of God. And suddenly the person says, well, God just spoke to me. And he said, suck it up. Get with it. Stop complaining. Stop whining. Well, that's not God. That's not God at all. But the point was that someone could think that that was God speaking to him, but it's not, because it doesn't follow along with his nature and character and what the Word of God says.
Let me just break in with a little rabbit trail there, too. If you find that to happen, then you just quietly, under your breath, rebuke that voice that they're hearing, and then say, well, let's, after you've done that, let's just listen again and see what God says. Okay. Now you go back.
So we've also talked to you about how a person's to maintain their healing. We did that in the last lesson. Remember, we talked about writing it down, the whole experience, and then beginning to tell other people. You need to tell at least three times or more, so that it really becomes a part of their memory bank and their life. And if the person needs to go back to the person that originally prayed with them, so that they can rejoice with the person who's received the healing.
Remember, we told you that sometimes you can do things at an altar in 10 minutes and sometimes you can't? Let me give you an experience, because this is going to work into what we're going to say next. We had a gal that came to one of our healing services, and the funny thing about our healing services is people knew to come and get prayed for physical healing, and they'd be up front and they'd be there quickly. Well, the people that wanted healing that's going to take a little bit longer, they always waited till the last so they could have more time. With this gal, and it's fine, we were there, and we were there as long as they needed us. And there was one particular gal that we thought it was going to take a long time, because she came and she had an experience as a child that traumatized her, and she wanted healing from it. What had happened is, when she was a little tiny girl, I don't know, maybe 4 years old or whatever, and she had a baby brother or sister that was in her crib, she and baby sister or brother witnessed her mother and dad fighting and arguing, and she was terrified. And she witnessed her dad killing her mother, shooting her, the whole traumatic, bloody mess. Well, obviously, the girl was traumatized, right? All through life, she just couldn't get over it. She couldn't get past it. And she'd go, God, you said you'd be with me. You promised you'd take care of me. Why did I go through that? Why did I have to go through that? And she would just have this memory and over and over and over again. So we worked through her for 10 minutes at the altar. And what happened? We said, well, we're going to ask Jesus to come into this event and take you where he wants you. And guys, I tell you, when I talk about this, I get so choked up. She said that Jesus appeared to her underneath that crib and had his arms around her. And he said to her, I was with you the whole time. I never left you. My heart broke because of what my little child was going through. Now, can you imagine what it was like suddenly to go back and be a child and have Jesus to wrap his arms around you? You know what? That took the lies from the enemy away just that fast, that she was alone, that God didn't love her, that there was just awful, and that he was not with her. And then all of that trauma and all of that hurt from the event in 10 minutes went away, because Jesus walked into the memory in his own way. And you know what? I could even visualize this little tiny blonde-headed, strawberry blonde-headed girl underneath that crib with Jesus huddled there with her, protecting her and taking care of her. Can you imagine her heart? Yes. Things to remember about healing of memories. Now, this is a situation. Sometimes complete healing may take time. It may take time. And even though they may be healed from specific painful memories, sometimes there may be layers associated to the original event that needs to be prayed through at another time. That's why it's so important to have a nice prayer room that you can spend a little time. And just like what happened in that altar with that woman and Jesus appearing, he came to her and he lifted all that out. But sometime in the future, because there's layers, she needed to go through the forgiveness process. She at some time had to go through the process of forgiving her dad for doing what he did, but also for her mother, because she felt abandoned. So this is where the layers come in, and Jesus has to speak to those layers. You weren't abandoned all those years just because your mother was not alive. I was always with you. But you see why sometimes it takes so many processes? And the important thing is do not push and do not force the process. We cannot make them go to places that is not our place, but we can ask Jesus to take them to the place that he wants them. And you know what? We've had so many times a person come to us, and we used to open up our home and did it in our home also, and they had this agenda of what Jesus was going to do. And you know what? Jesus completely went off into another direction and handled the event, and guess what it did many times? It took care of what they came for. And we didn't even have to talk about that. See, when Jesus walks in, he does it right. So we don't force or push the process, and we never question if there was any healing. Only they will know that. And even though they may have been healed from the situation prayed through at hand, for some it can be a lifelong process because of severe trauma. We had one gal that we worked with, thank you Jesus that she got healed thoroughly. It took 2 full years because there was so much in her background. But what was the other thing? It was so painful. She'd get a little bit of healing and she'd go, okay, I got to take a breather. I got a breather. And she'd come back 3 months later. And then she'd come back and we'd start again. And then she would quit for a while and she'd come again. And when you've got a person that's traumatized, that's got years and years and years of abuse or pain, you can't push it and you can't force it. When they're ready, John Sanford says, when they're ripe, they'll be ready. That means whenever they're really sick of it, they'll be ready. Every healing, though, is a victory. Just like that one lady, that was a victory. We didn't go through the other steps, but every healing is a victory, and it gives the person hope and expectation of what God's going to continue to do in their life. Always remember what we talked about last week, before the person leaves, to pray with them. Pray with them. Pray that the work that was done in them be sealed. The work be sealed. And many times when things have been lifted out of them, especially the darkness, we want to pray for the Holy Spirit to shine into those places that were originally filled with lies to be filled with light. And then we want to ask the Holy Spirit to cleanse them. If they've gone through the forgiveness process, they're already cleansed, but they need to feel cleansed. So that's where you walk in and say, Lord, now would you just come in and wash them and let them feel clean. So when they walk out the door, it's different, because Hebrews 10:21 says it's very, very necessary. And then we want to pray for a new picture of themselves and a continuing transformation of their mind. Now, before we end this, we want to tell you really quickly, at the end of your chapter, there are the condensed ways you can look at these memories. And I broke that up for you just because I can't remember from one time to the next what kind of memory is. And it doesn't really matter, but you have them for you. But also, we have for you, later, next lesson. Okay, after the next lesson, we have another handout that we didn't get into your book. Okay?
So with that, do you have any questions? Yes.
Speak up so we can hear you.
Okay. For somebody thinking of like the memories that aren't coming from here, but they're coming from somewhere else, that was stored somewhere else. People that have been in like a coma or something like that, and then later on they can recall what happened. Do you guys know anything about that?
Well, if I understand comas properly, that usually involves other things within the brain. So it's just whether the trauma that put them into the coma, or sometimes the doctors will even induce a coma. It all depends on what got processed.
Yeah.
And if some of it got processed, then they will remember some things. If the trauma was such and their mind is blocking it out, then there may be some things that will then trigger it. But if it's stored back here, then usually there's got to be something that will actually trigger it from back here, or chemical changes in the brain or other things. It's really hard to know unless you're walking through it with them and see what's...
And the other thing about comas, doctors seem to think that when a person's in a coma, they hear a lot that's going on.
Oh, they do.
So if they're in a coma and the people are talking about that traumatizing event, when they wake up, they could be very confused if they've remembered it or if what they remember is accurate, because what they experienced and what they may be talking about may be completely different. So it can be very confusing.
Yeah, just a point. Many times, because we go in the hospitals and things, if a person is, quote unquote, in a coma, you get down next to their ear, you talk to them, you pray for them, they can hear you. We've had people that have come out of the comas, they knew exactly, we were there. One day I got called to a room, and there was a woman, she was about ready to die. I got down, led her into salvation prayer, and 45 minutes later she was gone, but the room was filled with peace.
Yeah.
I mean, the Lord, and she was Jewish, and the Lord just stepped in and took care of all of that. So never be afraid to pray with them, talk to them, even though they're not responding back.
There was one person we stayed with all night because they were dying and we weren't really sure they had accepted the Lord. And about 20 minutes before they died, they were hanging on. We had talked to them the whole time while they were in the coma. And suddenly we said, we want to lead you in a salvation prayer. And if you can hear this, pray. You know what happened? Suddenly, something in their conscious happened because the atmosphere of that room changed. Yeah. And I believe that the Lord intervened somehow. They received the Lord because within 20 minutes they had died. And it's like after they died, we felt the Spirit release.
And the thing was, too, that they had... We knew that they had been fighting the Lord since childhood. And so what we did was we said, Lord Jesus, will you come in and speak to the person and reveal the truth to them about all the things that they've believed and what they've been doing. And then we just shut up and let the Lord speak to them. Now, do we know that the Lord spoke to them? Well, everything changed. Yeah. And we've also asked Jesus to come and do something. And I believe he did, and I believe that they're saved, and one day we'll see him in heaven.
And there was a daughter or a granddaughter was there that witnessed all this. It was kind of freaking her out because she could feel something going on in that room and she couldn't explain it.
Right.
Yeah. The Lord is so good.